Good morning. This is Megan Terry with Urban Harvest. I'm the Community Gardens Manager here this morning in the garden of Dr. Bob Randall, who's joining me here live. Hi Bob, good morning. Urban Harvest is a nonprofit that helps connect gardeners, people who are interested in backyard gardening, community gardening, to gardening resources. They have been around, it's going on 30 years?
I think it's more like 25.
25, that's right. Well, that's great. 25 years since 1994. And we are here today to talk all about tomatoes. So welcome all of our viewers who are in Houston or across the United States. I want to make sure I have our comment box up. I can't see it at the moment. But Carol Burton will be on the other end helping to answer your questions. And yeah, let's get started here in the garden this morning. Good morning, Bob.
Morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good. Well, great to have you. Thank you for having me. We're socially distanced here. We both have our masks on, so we're staying safe. And what are we going to be talking about today, Bob?
I guess we're going to talk about tomatoes. This climate, it's a complicated topic, and there are a lot of issues connected with it. This is all the larger tomatoes that I grow are open pollinated tomatoes, and that means that I can collect the seed. They're not hybrids, so I buy the seed once and plant them year after year. This one here is one called Stupis that I like to grow, Stupice. The reason it's good here is that it bears good tasting tomatoes at an early date. So most of these were in April, but you can see there's still plenty of small tomatoes on this vine. So I'll be eating these into late June, and we've already picked large numbers of them, so you can see what the tomato plants look like as they finish bearing.
Yeah.
And this one over here is a hybrid. All the cherries I grow are basically hybrid tomatoes, so I have to buy seed every so often. This is a particularly good one called Sun Gold. It's from my own collected seed, and it doesn't come out anywhere near as sweet or tasty. Thing that's good about Sun Gold is, for my garden, it is the earliest to bear in the spring, and it's the latest to bear in the summer. This thing will keep producing tomatoes. You can see up here it's still got flowers on it, and it will probably we had some, yeah, I can see little tomatoes forming there. So we'll be eating these things probably till the end of June or so, provided they keep going up.
Right.
See, now we got to the top of this thing, and what I really should do is put something up here, maybe tie it to that wire, and keep this thing going up, because that's what makes the new growth happen and new flowers.
Right. And can you talk about the difference between determinate and non-determinate?
Yeah, the determinate term means that they basically all fruit at the same time and then die. And the indeterminate basically means that at each leaf node they put out an opportunity for more tomatoes as they go up.
Right.
And from a point of view of backyard growing, you definitely want an indeterminate variety, and in the Houston area, early or mid-season, no late, what are called late tomatoes that take 80 or more days to harvest, because we don't have enough good weather, right temperatures for that.
Bring the mic closer a little bit, Bob.
So, yes, and so the reason you would grow a determinate is if you were market gardening, for example, and wanted all your tomatoes to harvest so you could plant something else.
Right.
Or if you were canning, let's say, tomatoes, you wanted a whole lot at one time. Or you had something you wanted to replace the tomatoes with. I can't imagine what that would be, but
yes.
You want to tear them out and put something else in, like okra.
Right.
You only have a small garden, it might make some sense
Right.
to get all your tomatoes at once. But
Right.
mostly, that's not what I want to do. I want to keep eating them.
Right.
We've been eating them since early April at this point, and
Wow.
We'll probably get some as late as July.
Right. Right. Great. And with gardeners who are having issues with their tomatoes right now, we have a few basic questions we want to ask you, Bob.
Sure.
And I'm also going to be asking our viewers. We have about 50 viewers right now. So I'd love to hear from you viewers. Where are you watching from, and what are your tomato questions for Bob? And so we have pest issues that come up a lot, Bob. What are the most common pest issues backyard gardeners will face in their gardens with tomatoes in Houston?
Well, there's quite a few. The worst one probably is the leaf-footed bug, or what's often called the leaf-footed stink bug.
Right.
And army worms and tomato hornworms are issues.
Right.
Those are probably the three. Birds will peck holes.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one.
Right. What do you do for
about the four? And
Right.
each one there's a basic strategy.
Right.
I should probably mention that pest control strategies are talked about in my book.
Yes, people have been asking about it, so I want to make sure they know. Year-round food
Vegetables,
gardening.
year-round food gardening for Houston and Southeast Texas. And that's it's got a whole chapter on easy ways to control pests.
Right.
Including what to do about the leaf-footed stink bug, which is a fairly complicated, it would take quite a while to explain what I do.
Right.
But basically they're attracted to something called long beans, and long beans fruit all summer, and so in early August or so you can easily pick them off the long beans and dispose of them in some soapy water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just get rid of them in August, there won't be any mother stink bugs for next spring.
Right. Okay, great. And someone is asking if it is too late for them to plant established tomato plants.
It's too late, so that probably brings up a broader issue.
Mm-hmm.
Tomatoes are warm season plants. They are not hot season plants. They don't like hot weather.
Right.
They don't like cold weather. They don't even like cool weather.
Right.
And so what that means is that they're that you have to plant tomatoes so that the blossoms will be out when the temperatures are right for pollination.
Right.
And those temperatures are daytime temperatures between 70 and 85,
Right.
and nighttime temperatures between 55 and 70.
Right.
And if you go too colder than that, they don't pollinate. If they're hotter than that, it doesn't pollinate.
Yep.
So wherever you are, that's when the tomatoes need to be fruiting.
Yes.
If you're in New York or somewhere,
Right.
it won't get over 85, hopefully, in
Right.
the summer. So you can they'll fruit all summer.
Right.
But here, it's the last week in March through the first week in May is when they pollinate here.
Right.
Where I am,
Yes.
if you're 50 miles north of here, they pollinate at later
Different.
times.
Right.
So that's your tomato planting has to be scheduled.
Right.
Same thing with fall tomatoes. It's the same issue, basically.
Okay. Yeah, someone was asking about fall tomatoes.
Yes, if
What are considered fall tomatoes?
basically you plant for people who are more or less within 75 miles of the Gulf of Mexico,
Right.
you can plant cherry tomato seeds in July,
Mm-hmm.
and depending on how cold your climate is. The problem that we have with any further colder than that is you're going to need a hoop house, a greenhouse to plant them in.
Okay.
Because it gets too cold in November then.
Right.
But if you don't have November freezes, if you don't have early December freezes,
Right.
you can grow tomatoes started from seed in. And what you want to do is plant a large plant out in first half of September.
Okay.
But you can't do it if it's going to freeze in November.
Yes.
So.
Yes. It's determinate on this weather conditions.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And we have a viewer asking, Matthew, how do you keep caterpillars off the tomato plants?
Okay, the best way to keep caterpillars are two things. One is to remember that nesting birds mainly feed caterpillars to their young birds and their fledglings, or they do larvae, which are often caterpillars or something else.
Right.
Soft, juicy, high-protein insects. And so that's one thing. Birds are beneficial if they're nesting.
Yes.
And secondly, there are parasitic wasps, lots of them, hundreds of species of them, all over the United States, that are attracted to flowers of plants like this dill here. Now, this dill was just accidentally planted here. It wasn't intentionally put near tomatoes. But this is dill going to seed right here.
Okay.
But cilantro, I can see from where I am some dead cilantro. There's virtually no blooming. Down there's some dying seeds of celery, of cutting celery. And all those members of the Apiaceae family have little flowers that attract parasitic wasps, and when they see that, they say, this is a nice place to raise a family.
Right.
I'm going to lay some eggs in caterpillars if I can find them.
Right.
So also all sorts of vespid wasps, the kind that sting, are beneficial because they love caterpillars and grasshoppers, I might add.
Right. Okay, great. We have another question on growing from seed versus from transplants and choosing between the two.
Well, you always grow tomatoes here from transplants, in the sense that it takes too long to fruit these things, and the tomatoes only grow at, what I always say is, they grow at temperatures that you like.
Right.
If you like the temperature, so does a tomato, and if it's too hot or too cold for you, the same for the tomato.
Yes.
So in order to have tomatoes blooming in the spring, when I have the right temperatures, I need to get started early enough, and it's way too cold for these things to grow then.
Yes.
So I plant, these were planted from seed the first week of January here.
Right.
Because I can protect the plants if I get a late freeze.
Right. Right.
If you can't, I would plant the seeds a little bit later. They were put under lights inside, which is, I think, the cheapest way to grow them and most effective way to grow them if you're a home gardener.
Right.
Greenhouses and hoop houses are good for anybody trying to do market tomatoes or something like that.
Right. Great. Great. And we wanted to also ask, I'm reading the comments now. Birds feed caterpillars to the young. Yeah, that's great. Lots of people learning about ecological pest management. Wonderful. And any thoughts on the cure to get rid of stink bugs?
Yeah, well, as I said, you need to trap them in summer. They're hard to trap on tomatoes. As a matter of fact, yesterday I killed 3 of them here in these tomato beds. But you'll see, you'll have trouble finding a stink bug in here.
Yes, yes.
And they're relatively easy to control. Once you do this once in the fall, you will have very little problem with these things again. You have to keep at it every year, but they really don't, they produce maybe 20 living offspring a year.
Right.
So 3 years you'll have 8,000 of these things if you don't do anything, but if you cut down on the reproduction of these things, it gets down to negligible.
Yes. And do you prune your tomatoes, Bob?
I don't prune tomatoes. In the South, that's a very bad idea.
Why is that?
It's not really that great an idea in the North, but in the South, what happens is it's so hot that you'll lose a lot of tomatoes to to sun scald because they need a certain amount of shade.
Okay.
But the other thing is that every one of these stems that come off here is production. And the reason people grew things on stakes long ago was they're very they didn't have the idea of a tomato cage, is what it amounted to. This is remesh, or reinforcing mesh. They sell it for reinforcing concrete.
Right.
For, I don't know, something like $150, you can make about 20 of these things with a bolt cutter.
Right.
And a bunch of work. So these are like 25, 30 years old, and they're 2 feet across, and all I have to do is keep these things inside the cage. Every so often they'll get out of the cage, and you have to see that you get the thing back in the cage. Right. That's what you do.
And keep it supported, right? Okay, great. And we talked about birds before. Bob, what are your methods in the garden for birds, especially for water in the summertime?
Well, we have year-round 3 different bird baths in the garden.
Wonderful. Okay.
And bird bath, birds need water. They'll find the food.
Right.
Sometimes food you wish they wouldn't eat.
Right.
But they're not a. It's not a. Water is what they need here.
Right.
Rained the other day. They probably got water today, but
right.
Amazing how much water. But we have a bird bath right outside our living room window, and we
right.
watch birds all the time
right.
swimming in them.
Right, right. That's great. And so we have about 9 minutes. So should we walk and show a little more of the garden?
I noticed one question that came on was this question of whether the tomato branches would collapse. And so that question, simply answer is that in a good tomato cage they won't break.
Okay.
Even large, these are of course cherries, but even
right.
large tomatoes you can hang on something like a wire here.
Right.
So
you have it supported.
This thing would pull way down. But
right.
There's no need for it to do that,
okay.
is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then the other question of whether things would ripen, and in fact there were 2 questions related to that.
Right.
Any of these green tomatoes will eventually turn.
Right.
Occasionally you'll lose one that doesn't turn, but mostly they'll all turn, even this late in the year.
Right.
And so I wouldn't worry about that problem. Sooner or later they will. It is worth knowing that as soon as the tomato starts turning color, you can pick it.
Right.
And you could pick it at this stage here and just ripen it inside, and it gets it away from birds and bugs.
Right.
So especially with larger tomatoes.
Right.
Something like this, you can pick it. And you could even pick this one, which just has a slight little bit of
blush.
I'm not going to do that because the birds won't do it.
Okay.
But something like this, what you want to do, you can certainly pick this and it will ripen inside and be just as tasty as if it were on here, maybe
right.
more so.
Right.
As it gets hotter. And
right.
the thing to just say here is that these things should be deep. This should be a deep yellow-orange when it's ripe.
Right.
So these things are paler. They're not really ripe yet, but you could pick them and they will ripen.
Okay.
So
great.
I don't know what to do with this. I may have
you might have to eat them. That's fine. I'm going to go through some more questions. So we have one question on: do you tickle or shake your plants to help them pollinate?
The only reason you would need to shake your tomatoes to help them pollinate would be if they were in a greenhouse.
Okay.
The wind here is quite sufficient.
Great.
I've never had a problem with that.
Got it.
And if you're only getting green leaves, or if your flowers are falling off, it's because the temperatures are wrong.
Got it. Any thoughts on leaf curl on tomatoes?
Not particularly. I know I didn't answer blossom end rot.
Oh,
You asked
right.
me that question.
Right.
The you're going to tomatoes are not really happy in this climate. It's hot and humid, and it's the rainfall. The best way to get rid of all diseases in tomatoes, more or less, is just a very high quality mulch on the soil, and year after year.
Right.
A soil food web, not tilling. Tilling really increases the likelihood you're going to get tomato diseases.
Right.
Now, some people have to till so they're doing acres or something.
Right.
But it's not a good strategy.
Got it.
Blossom end rot is technically it's caused by it's a very black end of your tomato, the flower end, and that is technically caused by a lack of calcium.
Right.
But it isn't usually caused by a lack of calcium in the soil.
Right.
It's usually caused by the tomato's inability to get the calcium to the tomato.
Okay. It's just inaccessible.
It just means the root system, and a lot of paste tomatoes do that because they're very meaty and they don't have much water in them.
Right.
And so they don't really get enough calcium.
Right. Right.
So you have to grow one that doesn't get end rot, and there's a number of hybrid paste tomatoes that do that, but many of the traditional ones. There's
Right.
an open pollinated one called Martino's Roma that doesn't get blossom end rot.
Okay. Great. Great. Well, there are more questions, Bob, as you can imagine. I think we might have to have a part 2. If you're down for it, because I want to show the tray of tomatoes that you have, and let's do a quick walkthrough of the garden if you're game.
Yeah.
Which way would you like to go? Can you step over?
Probably.
I don't want no tripping in the garden, please.
I done that already this year.
Right. And we're going to carefully walk with our microphone. So this is Dr. Bob Randall and Nancy Edwards' garden. She is here. Hello, Nancy. Good morning. Wonderful permaculture jungle, if you will.
Yeah, I would call it a food forest.
Food
Sounds
forest.
a little bit better than jungle.
It definitely does. It is a food
But
forest for
there's
sure.
We can't really, I mean, here's the oregano patch and 4-year-old collards plant and blackberries.
Wow. And people were asking, Bob, about leaving tomatoes for the fall. Could you leave those tomatoes or do you pull them out?
Well, the hybrids will often make it through the summer.
Right.
And you can...
Oh, your mic.
Yeah.
There you go.
The hybrids will make it through the summer, but they're not very productive compared with planting seeds.
Okay.
So I don't really advocate that. I don't think it's a good plan. So this is one of our bird baths.
Yes.
And you know, people will tell you when you do a bird bath, it needs to be in an open space so that your cats and so on can't catch the bird.
Right.
But another thing you can do is simply raise the whole business up so high that cats will be sorry if they try to jump it.
Yes.
And so that allows us to have a good habitat. This is a perennial rain garden.
Wonderful.
And lots of toads and other beneficial things. There's even a Gulf Coast ribbon snake that lives in there, and so on.
Wow.
And here, you know, I wrote the tomato book, but Nancy has been doing food gardening. Equal expert on a lot of this stuff. She dries these tomatoes. These are cherry tomatoes and cans tomatoes, and she's taught food preservation.
Wonderful.
She's a nutritional anthropologist in her background. This is a hybrid cherry called Apio, and this is the sun gold.
Wonderful.
And this one is an open pollinated beefsteak tomato called Kellogg's Breakfast. And I don't really like growing. This is delicious tomato. It's a mid-season beefsteak. Most of the beefsteaks are large. And it's a delicious tomato, but it really has a lot of problems just trying to get a completely clean fruit out of it. And it grows a fair number. This one is a French heirloom called Flame, or Yellow Flame, or Jaune Flamme, usually. And it's an absolutely gorgeous tomato. I'm going to put this down for a minute.
Oh, is that your phone?
Yeah. But the color of these tomatoes is just amazing.
The color of these tomatoes is amazing. Wow.
Yes.
Dr. Randall put his mic down, so.
Yeah, you'll have to repeat what I'm saying.
That's fine. He's cutting open one of these. Say the variety.
Flame, it's Flame, Yellow Flame.
Yellow Flame.
But look at the coloring in that, and it's delicious yellow tomato.
It's beautiful.
And
Yellow Flame tomatoes, gorgeous center. All grown here in Bob Randall's backyard garden.
Bloody Butcher, that one's Bloody Butcher.
Right.
And so there's plenty to eat here.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, so it seems like I'm too close to you to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Bob, for your time this morning. We really appreciate it, all of your knowledge. For those who want to learn more, would your book be the best resource for them?
It's certainly 500 pages of whatever I think is the best way to go. And everybody needs to create their own garden method.
Right.
But this will tell you at least what we've learned in a long study of the whole business.
Yes. Well, wonderful. Again, it's year-round food gardening for Houston. We thank you so much for your time, and we hope that we can come back and maybe do a part 2.
Sure.
Thank you, Bob. Take care. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have more questions, please, we will be answering them as we can in the comments and also on our website. Visit urbanharvest.org and check out our resources and our blog entry on planting and taking care of your tomatoes. Enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye.